Hello everyone, and welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissil, and today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle with part 20. Great to have you here. We got Gian J in the chat already. Good to see you. We got a good one tonight. As you know, we're continuing on with our reading from Gian J. Quasar's book, Into the Bermuda Triangle. We left off last week with Chapter 4. We finished Chapter 4. Today's Chapter 5. Those who lived to tell. Let's get that slideshow going. All right. So hope you all had a good week. If you're wondering, yes, I did have a good week myself. And we have about 20 pages we're going to read today. So, kick your feet up, get your coffee, or your hot tea. Recline back a little bit, and enjoy the show. So, since last week, you guys have any theories on what we might be dealing with in the Atlantic Ocean? Any clues as to what could possibly be going on underneath? And up above, and all around. Hey Andreas, good to see you. We're gonna have a nice cozy stream tonight. Let's begin, shall we? Chapter 5. Those who lived to tell. While in flight at 29,000 feet on July 8th, 1999, a Continental Airlines airliner with 155 passengers was struck by two unexplained jolts that caused the aircraft to drop precipitously by 600 feet before the flight crew could recover. The airliner, a Boeing 737, was about 160 miles south-southwest of Bermuda at the time, en route to San Juan, Puerto Rico, from Philadelphia. A vivid account of what happened comes from one cabin attendant, Leslie Thomas. Quote, "The crew had just completed the meal service and I was in the back of the aft of the main cabin, approximately row 29, picking up trays from the meal service. The seatbelt sign was off, and we were flying in smooth air with no sign of turbulence. Then, all of a sudden, flying in smooth air, the aircraft dropped abruptly, which caused my body to fly upward, hitting my head on the ceiling. I fell back to the floor on my knees. Approximately 10 seconds later, the aircraft dropped again, causing my head to hit the ceiling once again. At that point, I lost consciousness. When I awoke, I was very dazed, noticing my head bleeding, arms cut and bruised, and back and shoulders sore. End quote. The airliner went into a dangerous nose-down descent. The plane's captain, Joe Moore, that's spelled M-O-O-R-E, noticed the speed was already approaching MMO, or maximum Mach operating speed. He had not quickly corrected the airliner's sudden descent. Or had he not, it would have increased speed until it would have been impossible to recover. So again, here we're talking about a tailspin. We've been hearing recently with these accounts, it seems like there's something grabbing them, forcing them into like a corkscrew. And they call that the death spiral, the death spin. And that's seems to be a recurring phenomenon with the airliners in particular. In commenting on the incident, he confirmed, quote, "No reports of turbulence were reported by ATC, or the Air Traffic Control, along our route of flight or in our dispatched paperwork," end quote. While the first officer added, quote, "It had been smooth. There were no visual clues to an adverse ride. Both radars were on when the aircraft was hit," end quote. Whatever this force was, 71 passengers were injured, causing Moore to immediately call Bermuda for permission to divert his course and land. In another incident of this type, American Airlines Flight 935, a Boeing 757, so the last story was a 737, this is a 757, it's a little bit larger of an aircraft, was cruising at 31,000 feet, approximately 300 miles west-southwest of Bermuda on April 7th, 1996. Unexplained turbulence suddenly shook the aircraft up and down so violently that an aisle cart became airborne, striking a flight attendant on the leg and resulting in a serious injury. Flight 935 immediately diverted course and landed at Bermuda as well. Questions naturally arise whether these are normal CATS, or CATS, abbreviation for clear air turbulence, or some other unknown phenomenon. While meteorology has come far in being able to predict where CATs are likely to strike, in these cases, there was no warning whatsoever. Had there been any forewarning of these SIGMETs, SIGMETS, or significant meteorological information, would have been in effect and would have been a part of the pre-flight weather briefing package, or notice would have been immediately flashed to the crews when information became available. It could be, of course, that these were not cats in the strictest sense, but something else significantly affecting the atmosphere that might contribute to sudden disappearances of aircraft less resilient than big jumbo jets. A particularly pertinent fact about this observation involves their locations. They occurred approximately, and in one instance almost exactly, in the same position where the two KC-135 Stratotankers were mysteriously destroyed in 1963, and where the Tudor 4 Star Ariel vanished in 1949. Investigation into the weather along its course indicated that the chance for clear air turbulence was, quote, practically nil, end quote. Hey, Texas Learny, good to see you here in the chat. Alright, yeah, you're about to hit the bed. Hey, thanks for stopping in, I appreciate that. Unexplained turbulence, or pulses, or chops, continue to be reported by airliners. Their onset is always sudden, and their duration is very short. These incidents have caused a number of injuries, since the pilots, flight crews, and passengers have absolutely no warning. In each case, the weather radar in the aircraft showed no weather conditions that could instigate turbulence. In the case of United Airlines Flight 990 on October 22nd, 1993, while at 35,000 feet over the Bahamas en route to Miami from Rio de Janeiro, the encounter began with a light to moderate chop that lasted almost a minute, resulting in 3 injuries. A particularly interesting encounter happened on January 7th, 1997, when American Flight 2009, when en route to San Juan, Puerto Rico, from Philadelphia, was hit at 33,000 feet by, quote, 2 pulses, end quote, separated by only 8 seconds. Each pulse had a maximum of 1.6 G, or force of gravity. This brief but violent encounter caused 1 serious injury and 5 minor ones. This incident is particularly interesting because it happened at, quote, Champs intersection, end quote, where the 2 C-133 cargo masters had suddenly vanished decades before, in 1962 and 1963. An indication These may represent as yet unknown forces in the triangle, comes from a surprising incident involving a light plane. A Cessna 172 was just about to touch down at the airport at Culebra, Puerto Rico on February 15th, 1994. The winds were light, only 6 to 8 knots easterly. As the plane began the landing flare, 2 severe blasts from the right jolted it. Just imagine that happening. John McCone, an aerobatic pilot of considerable caliber, immediately regained control and brought his plane back in line with the runway. Seconds later, however, a third blast picked the plane up and threw it 60 to 80 feet to the left over buildings, over tension wires, across a road, and then slammed it down into an alleyway. Despite any evasive action McCone tried, both he and his student, Herman Vander Hyde, survived with minor to serious injuries. In summing it up, McCone recalled, quote, "In thousands of hours of mountain and aerobatic flying, I have never encountered a condition approaching the severity of this whirlwind, nor the sense of helplessness it created." End quote. So they're saying the winds were light, only 6 to 8 knots easterly. And then a total of 3 quote-unquote blasts hit this aircraft. So what? I wonder if it sounded like an explosion? Hey Jason H, good to see you here. Welcome to the live. Highly unusual and extremely sudden winds at sea and at sea level are a recurring theme in the Bermuda Triangle. The tall ship Pride of Baltimore, which was on a goodwill cruise and encompassed part of the Bermuda Triangle, was suddenly lost 250 miles north of Puerto Rico on May 14th, 1986. Bob Foster, deckhand and one of the survivors, told how, quote, "At that time, the winds were just from 30 knots that we had been sailing under to God knows what, 70 knots and above, I've been told. But I couldn't judge. Looking back aft, I could see horizontally blown spray coming up off of the top of the waves. And I could see the wind, actually the wind, hit the sail. And at that time, the boat just started to slowly roll over on her side. It wasn't a fast motion. It wasn't ... a rapid motion. It was just a slow heeling over." End quote. So that's pretty interesting that he says he could see horizontally blown spray coming up off the top of the waves, and he could see the wind. So I wonder if he could see the wind because of the water particles. But this phenomenon really sounds like it's something a little more than meets the eye. Captain Chuck Willis experienced a more sudden way to disappear in the Bermuda Triangle while off the Gulf Stream. While asleep in the early morning hours of May 1st, 1998, something happened to his fishing boat, Miss Charlotte II, number 2. Quote, "The dishes, glasses, everything came crashing onto the cabin floor. A huge wind had suddenly hit us. It threw us out of our bunks and cleared everything off our deck." End quote. Since the weather had been dead calm and the seas perfectly flat, Willis at first thought a waterspout had hit them and radioed that the deck had been cleared of all gear and that they were checking for damage. Then, however, quote, 20-foot waves hit our boat and sank us in under 2 minutes. We were told later that Cape Lookout registered 74-mile-per-hour winds at this same time. End quote. Willis was able to save himself and his crew by staying together in the ocean. So they were off the boat at that point. After 6 hours, they were picked up by a Good Samaritan vessel and brought to shore. Thank Heavenly Father. Captain Don Henry is perhaps one of the most impressive observers of anything unusual at sea. He is frank, direct, and strikes one as being a true, quote, sea dog, end quote. It is immediately apparent that he is accustomed to being in charge. When he politely invites you to sit down, it sounds like a command. He has a regulation Navy crew cut, and even in his early 70s, he is a large, powerful man. When he speaks, his keen eyes return to the sea. His career at sea extends from World War II until his retirement in the 1980s, covering every aspect of salvage. He has been a free diver, hard hat, and tug captain. In his various capacities, he has salvaged Japanese warships in Tokyo Bay and captained underwater salvage operations along the entire U.S. East Coast and in the Caribbean. But out of all the seas he has sailed, there is only one event in his long career he could not explain. It was back in 1966 in the Bermuda Triangle. Don Henry offers it in a plain and no-nonsense way, without digressing into any theoretical guesswork. It is best to let him tell it in his own words. So this is nearly 2 pages of an account here. We're going to begin. So these are the words of Don Henry. He's explaining his experience in the Bermuda Triangle. Well, we were heading to the Miami area where I had a salvage company at the time. We were on a return trip from Puerto Rico with a barge in tow. My tug was the Good News. She was a 160-foot tug with a lot of power, 2,000 horsepower. The barge itself was about 2,500 tons. We had it on a 600-foot tow line. It had carried petroleum nitrate, but was empty now. We were over the tongue of the ocean, about 3 days out of Rico. It was daytime, in the afternoon. I had been on the bridge for some time, since the morning, so I had gone to my cabin for a little rest, which is just aft the bridge. While I was in my cabin, I heard a great deal of commotion coming from the bridge. Their crew was hollering and screaming. I came running out onto the bridge and yelled, "What the hell is going on here?" The chief officer was there, and he told me to look at the compass. I walked over and looked. The gyro was tumbling, and the magnetic compass was going completely bananas. It was simply going around and around. I had never seen anything like that before. We had no communications of any kind over the radios. There were no lights. We lost the generators. They were running but produced no energy. There was just some kind of electronic drain at this time. There was just nothing. A case of 50 batteries I had picked up in San Juan had to be thrown away. They were completely shot. This we found out later. We didn't know this at the time. I went out on the bridge. I was going to check on the tug, but the sky caught my attention first. There was no horizon now. You couldn't see where the sky ended and where the water began. I looked down on the ocean. All I saw was foam. It was like milk. The sky was the same color. There was just no definition between the two, as there always is. So that's why I say there was no horizon. I automatically looked aft to the barge. It was a reflex action, but there was no barge. I knew it had to be there, but I couldn't see it. The tow line was leading back the way it was supposed to be, but there was simply no barge. I ran to the afterdeck, then down to the towing deck, and started to pull the towing hawser. You can't pull a 2,500-ton barge, of course, but you can tell if something is attached. It was. The line was tight. It was very taut. There was something on the other end, all right. I still couldn't see it, though. There was a fog or something around it, like clouds, and the tow line was running aft into that. It's hard to explain. I've likened it to the old Indian rope trick. The tow line was just sticking out of the fog. But the fog was nowhere else. It was just around where the barge should be. The water was also more choppy immediately around where the barge should be. I had heard about the Bermuda Triangle at this time. Most every seaman about those waters had. I thought, I don't want to be another statistic. I ran back up to the bridge and kicked those throttles full ahead. It wasn't like full ahead and clear for action. It was full ahead and let's get the hell out of here. We plowed ahead, or tried to. It seemed that something was pulling us back. It was like being in the middle of a tug-of-war. We were trying to go forward under our power, but we were being restrained. When you've been at sea for any moment of time, especially on the same tug, you get a feel for it. You can tell when it is moving and when it is being restrained. There is a vibration in a ship that is there all the time. You can tell when it's going and when it isn't. Now coming out of this thing was just like coming out of a fog bank. We could see the horizon again. We got everything back. The radios, the lights, the gyros, the generators. We got the damn barge back. The line was leading back to it. That fog was gone. We plowed ahead for some time. As soon as we got out of that spot, I wanted to make sure everything was alright. That the line hadn't weakened at the coupling during our struggle. I put a boat over the side and went back. The barge was warm, much warmer than it should have been. It wasn't hot. You could touch it. But it was much warmer than would have been normal. Like I've said, this encounter never scared me out of sailing the Bermuda Triangle afterward. I mean, it scared the hell out of me. But I was never leery about going back down in there. You can't avoid the area anyway. It's just something that happened, and as I've said a number of times, it sure made me into a believer. Now there's 3 questions here built into this, so I guess he is being interviewed. Question: how long did this last? He answers, the whole incident took only about, 7 to 10 minutes from the time I came onto the bridge until the barge came out of that fog. The next question: what had the weather been like before this? And he answers, the sea had been flat calm. Visibility had also been good, more than 10 miles. And the final question: had you ever experienced any changes like this in your compass before? And he answers, not like this. I knew a compass could tumble, but never saw that on a tug. You just don't get that much acceleration. When this happened, all I could think of is, my God, I'm next. And that's the account of Don Henry in 1966. Captain Don Henry. I'm going to say this. Based off of that account, this sure sounds like there's something cloaking itself that's trying to mess around with these boats. The fog, the wind, not being able to see the horizon line. Almost like whatever this is that's messing around with the boats, it's like it's curious or malicious. And it's blinding these sailors. It's borderline sadistic. I do want to say there's intelligence behind what's going on here. But a fog moving in and then moving out, and that they've never seen something like that before. The fog was just around the barge. And that he couldn't tell. He had to go and pull on the cable just to make sure that there was something there. He said that it was like a tug of war, though. So was something trying to take their barge? What do you all think? I'm starting to think there's some type of anomaly here. Of intelligent design that's messing around with these guys. Alright, continuing on. Retired Coast Guardsman Frank Flynn gives a remarkable account of another unexplained phenomenon at sea level. In his case, he experienced this while an ensign aboard the Coast Guard cutter Yamacraw, that's spelled Y-A-M-A-C-R-A-W, on an August night in 1956. His account has been pertinent and surprising relevance, or it has pertinent and surprising relevance to other cases of unexplained fogs and vapors and electronic drains. He recalled that at the time of the incident, the weather was absolutely perfect. The sea flat calm, and visibility and ceiling just about unlimited. They were heading out to sea from the Florida coast, into the Triangle. And here, Coast Guardsman Frank Flynn shares his account. It's very brief. At about 1:30 in the morning, we observed on the radar scope a solid line approximately 28 miles away. We were a little concerned about it at first. It had a strong resemblance to a landmass. However, a quick check of our navigation equipment indicated that we were right on course, approximately 165 miles offshore. We tracked it and found it was dead in the water. So we carefully approached it, and approximately 1.5 hours later, we got down to about a half a mile from the radar target, and we carefully moved closer to it. So they saw on the radar scope a solid line, and they're approaching it here. So that was Frank Flynn's account. About 100 yards from the strange object, the cutter turned on her searchlight. The mass was so dense that the light beam reflected off it, and the carbon arc couldn't penetrate it. They moved closer, with the searchlight beamed on it. At this point, they started a gentle left turn to avoid approaching the unknown vapor mass head-on. After moving in still closer, they nudged it with the starboard wing. They veered off several times and returned to nudge it again. Since it proved not to be solid, they returned to normal cruising speed and entered the unknown mass. Flynn recalled that visibility was about 0 within the vapor mass. On penetration of the mass, a surprising phenomenon also happened. The engine room called up, saying they were losing steam pressure. The situation was becoming serious. When their speed was down to 4 knots, they decided to reverse course. Moments later, they broke out of the mass. At the same time, all engine and electronic gear returned to normal. Flynn summed up, quote, "Now, as to what we might have encountered that night, I really have no way of speculating. Over the years after this happened, I talked to many oceanographers, and none of these people could shed any light whatsoever on what it might have been." End quote. So a solid line, they didn't know if it was solid. They didn't know if the mass was solid, but they saw a line on their radar. And it caused their ship to go in distress, pretty much. Alright, continuing on. Don Welsh and Ron Reyes' encounter with an unusual fog at sea level is another incident that might be considered a close call with forces in the Triangle. It was in 1996, off Port Canaveral, Florida. And here's their account. It was early morning, and we were heading out with a moderate wind and seas at about 2 to 3 feet. At approximately 5 to 6 miles offshore, we encountered a small fog bank. After just a few minutes, we entered an area with clear skies. Extremely calm wind. fog all around us and an eerie feeling. It was sort of like entering the eye of a hurricane. We went from a moderate wind into a fog bank, and then into an opening in the fog bank, which was a dead calm with sunshine and no sounds. We stopped to talk about it and have a cigarette and watched our smoke stay in front of us for a couple of minutes. We then proceeded back into the fog and then back into moderate winds with light seas. All I know is that it was a very eerie event. We have told this to many friends, and they think we are making up a story. That's a shame. See, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of these phenomenon. And we're getting new information with each account here. What really stands out to me from this account was, here they said we went from a moderate wind into a fog bank, and then into an opening in the fog bank, which was a dead calm with sunshine and no sounds. And their smoke from their cigarette just lingered there, not wafting, not ever so gently going away. They said, watched our smoke stay in front of us for a couple of minutes. The thing that stands out to me there is the lack of sound. I wonder what that could possibly be. Yeah, not sure what to say. And Quasar points out here about the friends thinking they were making up a story. A reaction that has often proven to be a barrier to those who innocently seek logical explanations. William Al Kittinger is yet another man who is intimately familiar with the ocean and sky of the Bermuda Triangle. He has flown them many times as an experienced pilot based in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. Al is also, perhaps, the closest person to being an actual eyewitness to a disappearance in the Triangle. He was the controller on duty at Harry S. Truman Airport, St. Thomas, on the night of November 3rd, 1978, when the charter Piper Chieftain disappeared while coming in for a landing, a disappearance that happened between Al's glance out the window at its landing light and his double check of it on the radar scope. After 1981, when the nation's air traffic controllers were fired by then President Ronald Reagan, Al became a fisherman in the Bahamas, a job that made him intimately familiar with its many islands and weather conditions over the next 10 years of his career. Along with being an astute and particularly qualified observer, he is a gregarious and level-headed man who now channels his energy to teaching Taekwondo in southern Florida. As a pilot and former air traffic controller, Kittinger is also a certified weather observer and an excellent source of information on visual phenomenon in the Bahamas. On a number of occasions, he would see fogs hovering over the ocean in the distance. They attracted his attention because the weather conditions were not right for creating fog. Taking them only as weather oddities, he never bothered to investigate them more closely. He is not without his first-hand encounters, however. On one occasion, while flying his Cessna, Al experienced a spinning of his compass. He had just taken off from Great Anagua when, quote, I noticed the compass spin around one full time. I thought it was merely deflected to something nearby. Then it did it again. That's unusual. It finally came back onto course. If you know what's beyond Great Anagua, nothing, you'll know how spooky it is to think you are about to lose your navigational equipment. End quote. A more prolonged encounter with unusual vapors and fogs, with accompanying electromagnetic phenomena, did not result in fatal consequences, due in part to the exceptionally experienced pilots. This was the flight of a restored Catalina PBY-6A flying boat en route between Bermuda and Jacksonville, Florida on June 11, 1986. One of the passengers, author Martin Caidin, that's spelled Caidin, an expert pilot and engineer, has a complete knowledge of every aspect of aviation and its history. He has been a test pilot, instructor, and investigator. Besides this, he has flown almost every type of aircraft in almost every place on this globe and is intimately familiar with numerous and varied weather conditions. It is best to let him recount what happened, with all his candor and directness, as he described in his book, Ghosts of the Air, a compendium of unexplained aviation stories. Just give me one moment here. So this is an excerpt of his book here. Now the weather was perfect. We had range up the Gazoo. We had a couple of $1 million worth of special avionics gear. We wanted to know what the weather was like. We didn't even have to look outside. We were getting direct printout photos on maps from satellites more than 20,000 miles above. One of those days when you could see forever. The perfect weather disappeared. We could see only the nose right in front. The wingtips disappeared into what looked like the inside of a milk bottle. Maybe it looked more like inside a batch of eggnog. So he's describing the fog here. You looked up, you saw a tiny patch of sky. Everything else was yellow mud or eggnog. You looked down, and you saw a tiny patch of ocean, and the rest, you guessed it, was eggnog. The magnetic compass began to rotate. It picked up speed and went whirling around as if it were a whirligig. We checked the photo printout from the weather satellite. The Metstat picture showed us an absolutely clear air. The nearest clouds were 200 miles south of us. But we couldn't see out the airplane. Just about that time, the Metstat print machine died. The electric innards of the Catalina, all 2 million clams worth, shriveled up inside. The Loran went out. The electronic fuel gauges sagged to fuzzy markings. The long-numbered aviation gear, digital, read 88888888. So basically erroring out. The radios died. Everything still had power, but nothing worked. Why didn't we simply hold heading with the directional gyro? Because it was trying to imitate the magnetic compass. We went down low. You could see tiny details of spray, but not 50 feet ahead of us. We climbed up to 8,000 feet. Lots of eggnog up there, too. About an hour out of Jacksonville, we seemed to penetrate a curtain. Of an instant, no more eggnog. We could see forever and ever. The mag compass settled down. The directional gyro quit its foolishness and steadied. The electronics emerged from their funk, and everything worked perfectly. $2 million worth of equipment with satellites printing out photos of the weather above them. And none of that picked up what they were seeing with their own eyes. And they're flying in a plane, mind you. Very interesting, they're calling it eggnog. So it didn't look like typical fog. So I'm wondering if is this man-made or is this some other type of anomaly? That's what I want to know. Or are these mixtures of both, depending on which encounter we're describing here? The great aviator Charles Lindbergh was himself a victim of an unexplained haze and magnetic anomalies in the Triangle in 1928 while flying his famous Spirit of St. Louis. After a night departure from Havana, he headed northward into the Triangle. Shortly afterward, he noticed his compass begin to rock left to right, and eventually it began to spin. His Earth induction indicator, an early navigational instrument, began to wander and give unreliable readings. Shortly thereafter, a haze enveloped his plane, preventing him from using any form of astral navigation. It was impossible to make out the sea below, and thereby tell by what the white caps the direction and speed of the wind. I believe that they're saying about like the foamy white that the water makes when there's waves. When dawn finally broke, he noted the sky was a peculiar, quote, dark milk, end quote. This continued for hours, and then the haze parted and disappeared, and land came into view beneath him. At the same time, his navigational equipment returned to normal. Using his charts, he was able to discern his position by the matching outline of the coastline. This, however, contributed to the mystery, since it proved he had gone farther than his fuel could have carried him. In his book, Autobiography of Values, in 1976, he first mentioned this incident. One might imagine because the Bermuda Triangle popularity at the time took some of the stigma off a pilot reporting the completely unexplained. Weird navigational discrepancies that neither register to navigation, equipment, nor to pilots, but go hand in hand with time and distance discrepancies, have also been reported in the Triangle. Remember the case of the C-54 in 1947? That was never once on course, nor from the transmitted position reports did it seem apparent to its pilots. Alan Oneida, spelled O-N-E-I-D-A, a retired Air Force electronics engineer and radar operator, experienced this same, though not fatal in his case, way of disappearing. It was back in 1980 when Oneida was radar man aboard an S-3A on ferry flight from Bermuda to Jacksonville, Florida, along almost an identical course as the C-54. He recalls the sun set when they were about 150 miles off the mainland. It was now dark, but the weather was perfect. Soon after, when they picked up the lights of the coast, the pilot initiated calls to Jacksonville, approach. All to no avail. Quote, "Finally, one of the pilots excitedly exclaimed, 'We're over Miami. We're nowhere near our ADIS, or the Air Defense Identification Zone, penetration area. The fighters could scramble on us.'" End quote. Far outside of their radio sectors, they were incapable of contacting any base and informing them who they were. The pilot immediately commenced evasive maneuvers and dropped down to an altitude of 200 or 300 feet, and then followed the coast up to Jacksonville until, at St. Augustine, they climbed once again and made contact. Oneida, however, recalls how close they were to being shot down. In parentheses, it says the Cold War was still hot in 1980. Or, just as bad but a more mysterious fate, how close they were to missing the Florida mainland as a landmark altogether. Quote, "It is my contention that another 30 to 40 miles south of Miami, and our crew would not have made it to Jacksonville. We had no idea we were off course. We were 300 miles off course. That is a large deviation in my book, especially since Bermuda isn't all that far, about 700 miles. Miami is, however, 1,000 miles from Bermuda. There's no explanation how the flight arrived on time at Miami yet was 300 miles beyond its course. One is tempted to feel, however, that the flight may have just skirted the phenomenon that had cost so many others their lives." Everywhere along the triangle, evidence for electromagnetic phenomena is accumulating. Reports of ships disappearing from land-based or ship-based radar momentarily or for several hours before reappearing unharmed have persisted over the last 25 years. It is later discovered that the ship had so mysteriously vanished Hold on here. It was later discovered that the ship that had so mysteriously vanished was experiencing unexplained power drains at the precise time it was invisible to radar or to the searchers looking for it. So we're talking about glitching off the map here. These people are glitching out of known physical sight. And all electronics fail. As recently as May 23rd, 2002, the cruise ship Destiny lost almost all power while off the Leeward Islands en route from a Caribbean cruise to San Juan, Puerto Rico. According to one passenger, Marcia Pilgrim, during this time it was impossible to contact any outside line or relay, cell phones were inoperable, and no electrical system would function, including elevators, air conditioning, and navigational equipment, resulting in a completely stranded ship. When the Coast Guard was finally raised, the large cruise ship could not be found either by radar or by searchcraft, but drifted for 8 hours completely disabled until power returned and it cruised to St. Lucia Harbor. Quote, after being in St. Lucia for 4.5 hours longer than they said we would be there, Marcia recalled. A man boarded carrying a briefcase and a bag. As soon as he was on board, we left. Someone said the Coast Guard was on board with us. End quote. Further evidence of electromagnetic phenomena interfering with equipment is the continued and unreliable depth readings recorded by a number of ships. One such incident involved the Navy spy ship USS Harkins on a cruise through the Triangle north of Puerto Rico in 1972. When going east, the vessel's depth recordings were 450 feet, but when returning along the same course only a day later, instruments indicated a depth of 1,700 feet. So from 450 to 1,700. During this time, one incident occurred that was particularly interesting. One of the new Bell helicopters carried on the vessel had just landed. After the helicopter crew disembarked, the chopper shuddered and split in half by about 1 inch apart along a jagged line from nose to tail. Navy engineers and the manufacturer's representatives waited for the ship to return to port, where the helicopter was unloaded, and no more was heard about that. Unexplained magnetic anomalies seem strangely concentrated around Bimini Island in the Bahamas. One witness to these is author Dr. David Zink, who during his protracted research and dives around Bimini studying its famous rock formations began to note some recurrent and unexpected compass readings. Quote, in 1975, at the same time of year, August, we had apparently experienced a 6-degree magnetic anomaly. What our findings meant so far was that in addition to the local charted 2-degree westerly variation, we had observed an additional 6-degree variation in August of 1975, and an additional 3-degree variation in August of 1976. He added, these observations added to my growing awareness of unexplained magnetic problems in the Bahamas. End quote. There may be a simple reason why this sporadic phenomenon has not gained greater public recognition. Bill Keith is a no-nonsense diver with over 18 years' experience in the Bimini area. He is also owner and operator of Bimini's only dive shop, Bimini Undersea. He knows the seas around Bimini, literally from top to bottom. He notes that much of the navigating done by the local fishermen is point of sight, in which there is little need to refer to one's compass. Locals instantly know where they are by noting a familiar landmark on the horizon. He adds, however, that during his 18 years on Bimini, quote, there have been a number of times when we have looked at our compass our compasses and noticed that they were pointing in the wrong direction. We jokingly say, "Look, it's the Bermuda Triangle." End quote. It is also possible, as Dr. Zink's observations imply, that such anomalies are prevalent only at certain times of the year. Perhaps somewhat tentatively linked to this phenomenon are the rashes of unexplained grounding of ships in the Bahamas and Florida Keys. In 1 week alone, 3 vessels went mysteriously off course and grounded on the same reef. A possibility that these could be sideline events of acute electromagnetic aberrations occurring elsewhere is suggested by the intensity of the unexplained electromagnetic disruption experienced around Bimini by Bruce Davies, captain of the 26-foot Grandpa's Toy. While participating in the Bimini extravaganza, a promotional boat race to Bimini sponsored by Saltwater Sportsman magazine, he was approaching Bimini on June 5, 1997, when all of his electronic and navigational equipment suddenly fritzed, and he was unable to home in on the island. When he was finally able to get his VHF radio to work, he was eventually located and discovered to have overshot the island by 8 miles. He was escorted to Bimini by another boat where, upon arrival at the dock, all his equipment started working normally again. His pithy reaction is somewhat typical of those who sail the area. Quote, "The Bermuda Triangle did a number on us." End quote. For aircraft, there appear to be levels of intensity to these moments, often when near unusual or isolated clouds or fogs. The compass seems the most easily affected. But if the encounter is more severe, the GPS will go out, as well as the radio. In grading these events, one must consider the encounters where only the compass was affected to be a mild one. Although those who have experienced it confide that this hardly diminishes the initial scare or the potential dangers of getting hopelessly lost. Pilot David Angstrom's summation is perhaps the most concise of what every pilot has expressed. He was flying 2 friends, one of them new to flying, from Andros, Bahamas, to Miami in January 1996. When approaching Bimini, a cloud, quote, "came out of nowhere," end quote. His compass started to spin and his RPMs dropped way off. Quote, "I basically almost shit my pants at this point, but there is no point being afraid. Besides, the new guy was in a right state by then," end quote. He was able to turn around and luckily find his way back to Andros. Just give me one moment here. Bruce Gernon's experience, involving the formation of a strange meteorological phenomenon, while passing Andros Island and approaching Bimini on December 4th, 1970, is a graphic illustration of what might be termed a severe encounter with an unknown quote, electronic fog, end quote. It was about 3 o'clock that afternoon, and just after takeoff from Andros Island, when Jernin, in company of his father Bruce Jernin, Sr., and business associate Gus Lafayette, saw a lenticular or lens-shaped cloud sitting very low over the ocean. They noticed it because it was lower than anything they had ever seen before, about 500 feet from the surface, Jernin estimated. Continuing his angle of ascent, about 1,000 feet a minute, they noticed that the lenticular cloud was undergoing a metamorphosis into a huge, towering, cumulus cloud, which seemed to be rising about as fast as they were. For a few minutes it engulfed the bonanza until Jernin climbed atop it and entered clear skies at 9,000 or at 11,500 feet altitude. Jernin, looking behind him, noticed that the cloud had built into an enormous squall, extending in the shape of a semicircle behind them. Shortly after this, they noticed another cloud building before them. When coming closer, they noticed that the cloud originated from the surface of the ocean, like the cloud they had left behind. But in this case, it extended about 60,000 feet high. Jernin decided to fly around it. But after several miles, they realized that it curved around them to the east. It was then they realized that this was the same cloud. Beyond their vision, it had formed into a gigantic donut, extending around them. Jernin felt it must have had a 30-mile diameter, since visibility was about 10 miles that day, and the clouds extended far beyond his view. Jernin admits he felt as if he were hemmed in. The cloud was too high for his bonanza to fly over, and it was impossible to descend to get under it. The donut-shaped cloud was continually constricting around them until it was now only about 4 to 5 miles interior diameter. Extraordinary, bright white flashes burst about the inside of the cloud, and it grew increasingly darker. What does that sound like to you? I'm getting a visual in my head here of what this could be. I'll explain afterward. Jernin takes up the narrative. So here's his account. I noticed a large U-shaped opening on the west side of the donut cloud. I had no choice but to turn and try to exit through the opening. As we approached, we watched the top ends of the U-gap join, forming a hole. The break in the cloud now formed a perfect horizontal tunnel, 1 mile wide and more than 10 miles long. We could see the clear blue sky on the other side. We also saw that the tunnel was rapidly shrinking. I increased the engine RPM, bringing our speed to the caution area of 230 miles per hour. When we entered the tunnel, its diameter had narrowed to only 200 feet. I was amazed at what the shaft now looked like. It appeared to be only a mile long instead of 10 plus as I had originally estimated. Light from the afternoon sun shone through the exit hole and made the silky white walls glow. The walls were perfectly round and slowly constricting. All around the edges were small puffs of clouds of a contrasting gray, swirling counterclockwise around the airplane. We were in the tunnel for only 20 seconds before we emerged from the other end. For about 5 seconds, I had the strange feeling of weightlessness and an increased forward momentum. When I looked back, I gasped to see the tunnel walls collapse and form a slit that slowly rotated clockwise. So the tunnel just closed. And then was turning like that. All of our electronic and magnetic navigational instruments were malfunctioning. The compass was slowly spinning, even as the airplane flew straight. Instead of the blue sky we expected, everything was a dull grayish white haze. Visibility seemed like more than 2 miles. Yet we could not see the ocean, the horizon, or the sky. The air was very stable, and there was no lightning or rain. I like to refer to this as an electronic fog, because it seemed to be what was interfering with our instruments. We were in the electronic fog for 3 minutes when the controller radioed that he had identified an airplane directly over Miami Beach, flying due west. I looked at my watch and saw that we had been flying for less than 34 minutes. We could not have reached Miami Beach. We should have been approaching the Bimini Islands. I told the controller that he must have identified another airplane and that we were approximately 90 miles southwest of Miami and still looking for Bimini. Suddenly, the fog started breaking apart in a weird sort of electronic fashion. Long horizontal lines appeared in the fog on either side of us. The lines widened into slits about 4 or 5 miles long. We saw blue sky through them. The slits continued expanding and joined together. Within 8 seconds, all the slits had joined, and the gray fog had disappeared. All I could see was brilliant blue sky as my pupils adjusted to the abrupt increase in brightness. Then, I saw the barrier island of Miami Beach directly below. And that's the end of the account. Both fascinated and bewildered by his experience, he began to do some math. He checked his watch. He had been in flight only 47 minutes. Yet the course must have been at least 250 miles. There was no way he could have traveled it so fast. Quote, I could not logically understand what had happened during the flight, although I felt it was significant and reviewed it in my mind several times a day. End quote. He heard about the Bermuda Triangle in 1972 and about the theories of time warps causing some to disappear. Quote, it was then I realized time was the key. It should have taken about 4 minutes to travel through the tunnel, since it appeared to be between 10 and 15 miles long. Instead, this is precisely how long it took for us to leave the storm and reach clear skies. The remarkable thing is that we did not come out of the storm 90 miles away from Miami as we should have. We traveled through 100 miles of space and 30 minutes of time in a little more than 3 minutes. So 10 times speed. There's a couple of questions here, and he answers them. First question. Did you notice any blue-green glowing phosphorescence before, during, or after your experience? He answers, I didn't notice any colors other than shades of gray. It was the color of fog. That is one of the reasons I call it electronic fog. And the next question. Was any turbulence associated with your experience? And he answers, I did notice some turbulence related to the fog. When my airplane reached the end of the tunnel and made its exit from the storm, I felt the sensation of zero gravity. I also felt as if we were being given a boost in forward momentum. At the same time and length of this feeling, contrails formed on the edges of the wingtips for about 10 seconds. It was at this point the electronic fog attached itself to the airplane. I believe the airplane was flying in clear weather, but it appeared to be IMC, or instrumental meteorological conditions, because the fog was attached to the airplane. In other words, I wasn't flying through the fog. I was flying with the fog. It takes a different perspective of the mind for a pilot to realize this. And this could be the reason for a pilot to become immediately spatially disoriented. And that's the end of his account. While most pilots and ship captains are resigned to accepting their encounters as unexplained and sudden events, over the last 30 years, Jernan had continued to puzzle over what had happened to him. His studies have led him to the conclusion that after the storm had dissipated, the electronic fog is capable of drifting around for many more hours. In developing this possibility, many, but perhaps not all, of the encounters in the Bermuda Triangle with unexplained fogs and electromagnetic anomalies might have occurred in the aftermath of this type of meteorological formation. But considering the excitement many have expressed over the sudden appearance of these electronic fogs out of nowhere, they seem to form randomly and dissipate just as quickly without building any storms. Jernan, having considered what happened to him, has been very alert when traveling the areas of the Bermuda Triangle thereafter. He has built up thousands of flying hours experience in the area. He is an excellent in situ observer with a keen eye for detail and an excellent memory for recall. On a number of occasions, he has noted other phenomena. About 3 months later, he observed a UFO speeding at him. He recalls a peculiar coincidence between it and his previous unexplained experience. And he shares his account here. Hey Ivy, good to see you here. Thanks for stopping in. I appreciate it. So here's another account by Jernan. We were flying at night about 9:30 p.m. in February, and the weather was CAVU, or Ceiling and Visibility Unlimited. So it's crystal clear out. We were over Miami at 10,000 and headed due east toward Bimini. When we got a few miles offshore, we noticed an amber light far to the east of us. Suddenly, it came toward us at an incredible speed. It was on a collision course with us, and within seconds, it was right in front of us. It was bright amber and shaped like a saucer, with a diameter of about 300 feet. It was massive, and I felt that its mass was of a solid nature and not just a form of light. I banked to the left to avoid a certain collision. When I looked back to see where it was, it had vanished. It may have been an illusion, although we both saw the exact same thing. It is interesting to note that the UFO was on the same flight path that I had traveled when I went through the time tunnel and encountered the electronic fog. And that's his account. Give me a moment here. I need to get a drink of water. Man, I sure went through a time tunnel right now. Huh? It's been an hour and 40 minutes. Doesn't really feel like that. UFOs and USOs are frequently seen in the Bimini area and in other areas of the Bermuda Triangle. Dr. J. Manson Valentine, retired professor of oceanography at the University of Miami, cataloged many of these during his near 50 years of zoological and oceanographic work in the waters of the Triangle. He observed, quote, "There are more sightings in this area than at any other place. There have been many sightings of aircraft that we know are not planes and undersea craft that we know are not regular submarines. End quote. I'm sorry, that's making me think of the Great Lakes Triangle. Because there's claims that the Great Lakes Triangle has even more strange phenomenon and disappearances. In collating dozens of UFO/USO reports in the Triangle, Dr. Valentine has noted how localized fogs and electromagnetic anomalies seem to go hand in hand with their arrivals and departures. At normal cruising or hovering, however, they appear merely as unidentified objects or glowing lights. The shape of a USO is usually described as more oblong than a saucer, many times 100 or 200 feet long. This last feature was also noted in the area of water discoloration after the Phantom II disappeared in 1971. But they display abilities none of our submarines are capable of. Examples of Valentine's data include the following account related to him by Robert Kuhn, a part-time fisherman in Miami. While a few miles off Fowey Rock, Key Biscayne, in May 1975, he noticed a massive gray-white object beneath his boat that looked like an underwater cloud. Its presence fritzed his depth finder and sonar, and he decided to get out of the area quickly. Another encounter with a similar USO was experienced by fisherman Don Delmonico in April 1973 near Great Isaac, near Bimini. The object was light gray, about 100 or 200 feet long, and seemed to be smooth, without fins, portholes, elevators, superstructure, or any type of propulsion. It raced underneath his 35-foot boat, traveling about 75 miles per hour. In assessing such cases, Dr. Valentine has offered that these may not be objects at all, but magnetic fields forming underwater. Intense enough to create cloud-like formations caused by the actual object materializing or disturbing the magnetic field before it does materialize. UFOs and USOs are often seen around the tongue of the ocean or areas of drop-off, quote-unquote. The colloquialism for the places where the shallow banks suddenly drop off to the deep blue abyssal depths. They seem oddly concentrated around Bimini, reported mostly around Great Isaac Shoals north of Bimini or south of the Moselle Reef. Although Bimini's ever redoubtable fishermen are more than ready to ad-lib some good stories. An encounter at Bimini by two members of the oceanographic crew of the New Freedom is, however, an unimpeachable account of a UFO at hovering or normal cruising. This was seen during a stroll along the beach after dinner on a very starlit night. August 2nd, 1975, Dr. Jim Thorne, its expedition leader and chief eyewitness, made the following report to Dr. Valentine. A single star seemed to detach itself from the others and come towards us. It hovered directly above us and then moved to the right. It maneuvered first to the right, then to the left, and back again. It appeared to stop dead in the sky and hover over different parts of the island and sea around it. I would calculate its speed at several thousand miles per hour. It seemed to be a bluish white and also to vibrate. At times, we thought we heard a buzzing sound, or rather, a steady oscillation of sound. We observed it for a full 3.5 minutes. It was close enough for us to see its shape. When it got close, I saw it was lighted with blue-white lights. It started away very fast. And that's the end of the account. Unusual lights in the sky, dematerializing or materializing in association with strange atmospheric clouds and vapors, continue to be reported in the area of the Bermuda Triangle. The experience of two boaters, Paul Vance and Doug Gurdon, on June 25th, 2001, happened while cruising to the Bahamas and West Palm Beach, Florida, on Vance's 26-foot sailboat, Rare Form. Vance, a commercial pilot, is particularly qualified to identify size, distance, and speed of anything in the atmosphere. He reported what he saw in a pilot's cool and spontaneous reportorial style. Welcome back, Texas. So this is the experience of two boaters, Paul Vance and Doug Gurdon. 11 miles offshore, I looked up in the sky to the northeast and witnessed something strange. There was a single light, I'm guessing about 3,000 to 5,000 feet in altitude, which I assumed to be an aircraft with its landing light on, although not very brilliant. The light then appeared to turn downward, which then made me think it may be a helicopter with a searchlight, although again it wasn't a brilliant light. A swirling mist then engulfed the light as the light slowly drifted down into the mist. The whole mass of mist then glowed a short time and then dissipated along with the light. Stars could then be seen, and the sky was clear. This happened at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and my friend witnessed it too and tried to videotape it, but the boat was pitching too much to get anything. So I'll read part of it again. A swirling mist then engulfed the light as the light slowly drifted down into the mist. The whole mass of mist then glowed a short time and then dissipated along with the light. And the stars could be seen in the sky again. So here's questions followed by their answers. This is all questions together. What color was the light? Did it appear as though it landed? Did you hear any noise in the sky? Was the moon about to rise? And they answer, the light was white. It didn't disappear as though it landed because the swirling mist didn't extend to the ocean surface. Our engine was running, so if it made any noise, we probably couldn't hear it. The moon was already up at about 70 degrees toward the south. The feeling I got was that the light appeared, waited a moment until the swirling mist began beneath it, and then descended through the mist tunnel and disappeared. It's like the mist was a door. That's the end of his account. Or actually, there's a little more to the account, but that's that portion. Quasar says here, it is best to let Vance elaborate on the sighting, as noted in subsequent conversations. So Vance begins here. The light turned downward and descended into the swirling cloud, making the whole cloud glow. When the cloud dissipated, the glow dissipated with it. It was a single white light. I'm a licensed commercial pilot with an instrument rating, so I know what planes look like at night. My common sense tells me it was atmospheric, but it sure looked like it was passing through a passage. The weather was CAVU with a puff of cloud here and there. Wind was light from the east. We don't know what we saw, but both agreed it lasted 2 to 3 minutes. And here's another question. Did you notice any changes or deviations with your compass, navigational equipment, or motor? And Vance answers, the motor lost power at the same time we saw the light. It didn't quit. The RPMs dropped way off, and it ran rough. We were so amazed at what we were seeing, though, we hardly took note of the engine. The wind was out of the east, so we had to sail back to West Palm and never made it to the Bahamas. The next morning, we were swimming off the boat and noticed a lot of black soot around the exhaust, and I immediately suspected the fuel pump diaphragm as the problem. After getting back to Indiana, I began checking out the engine and found the FPD to be okay. The fuel pump diaphragm was okay. Upon checking the ignition system, I discovered a cracked coil. The coil would barely jump the spark plug in open air, so I doubt that it would fire much harder, or that it would fire much under cylinder pressure. I didn't mention the engine before because it never got better after the sighting, so I didn't possibly see how the crack could be related. I'll have to admit, though, when the engine faltered and I saw that swirling mist, I thought to myself, my God, there's something to this Bermuda Triangle stuff. And that's the end of his account. A recent UFO encounter involved the cruise ship Celebrity, when 4 passengers stargazing for constellations were surprised when one of the stars started to move, much as in Dr. Thorne's encounter, and much like encounters I had down in Texas. The incident took place on October 11th, 2001, between 12 and 1 a.m. The ship was a day out of Nassau, near Bimini, en route to Miami. The sky was clear and the stars were shining brightly. The object began to circle, moving alternately in clockwise and counterclockwise motions. After 15 minutes of this, it started to home in on the ship in a maneuver that might be regarded as reconnoitering. Quote, all movements were very deliberate and were not haphazard. End quote. 3 rows of lights in the form of a triangle became visible on its underside, and they strobed blue, white, red, and green. The exact shape of the object could not be distinguished beyond these undercarriage lights. It then recessed to the point of looking like a star again. Although preferring to remain anonymous in any forum related to the Bermuda Triangle, 2 of the witnesses, a corporate attorney and his wife, a doctoral student in health, did report it to the ship's personnel at the reception desk and were assured by a purser that a crew member would be sent out to verify it. Quote, her reaction led us to believe that they get such reports often. End quote. At the opposite end of the spectrum is Columbus in the early hours of another October 11th long ago. He is, without doubt, the first person to record unusual phenomena and a strange light associated with those seas we call today the Bermuda Triangle. His logbook speaks in an impressive way over the vault of time, along similar lines with affidavits of more recent explorers and sailors. During his first voyage to the New World, no less than 5 times he recorded unexplained phenomena, thrice involving the compass, once involving the sea, and once involving an unexplained faint light rising up and hovering in the distance. Although his log was eventually lost to posterity, much of its annotations and entries were preserved by Fray Bartolome de las Casas in his Diario. Thursday, 13th of September, 1492. On this day, at the beginning of night, the compasses northwested, and in the morning they northeasted somewhat. Monday, September 17th. The pilots took the north, or the North Star, marking it. They found that the compasses northwested a full point, which in brackets it says 11¼ degrees. And the sailors were fearful and melancholy and did not say why. The Admiral, Columbus, was aware of this, and he ordered that the north be marked again when dawn came, and they found that the compasses were correct. The cause was because the North Star appears to move, and not the compasses. Sunday, September 23rd. Because the sea had been calm and smooth, the men complained, saying that since in that region there were no rough seas in the Sargasso Sea, it would never blow for a return to Spain. But later, the sea rose high and without wind, which astonished them. Sunday, 30th of September. The Admiral says, here when night comes, the compass is northwest 1/4, and when the dawn comes, they align with the North Star exactly. And that's the end of the logs. The unexplained light, rising and then hovering in the west, is perhaps the most propitious phenomenon recorded in the Triangle. It happened on the eve of discovering the New World, and it inspired Columbus and his crew to sail on and discover the Bahamas. Columbus saw it first, then Pedro Gutierrez. Then, quote, after the admiral said it, it was seen once or twice, and it was as a small wax candle that arose and lifted up, end quote. What both arose, alcava, and lifted up, levitava, imply is hard to say. Whether it means it rose up, hovered, and then disappeared upward, or merely vanished while levitating is unclear. Today, it is hard for landfall specialists to explain it, since Columbus was too far at sea to have seen any bonfire or torch on land, and local island fishermen would not have been so far at sea at night with torches to attract catch. Scholarly debate has subsequently offered to explain the erratic compass readings by the apparent revolution of Polaris around the celestial pole, an optical effect for an observer, although this is only visual and not something mechanical that comes and goes. Aside from this, it has also been suggested that the dusk and dawn readings varied. During the evening readings, a crewman gotta restart. Aside from this, it has also been suggested that the dusk and dawn readings varied because during the evening readings, a crewman unwittingly placed the compass too near a bucket of nails, a sword, or some other metal object, which then deflected it. And that's just a suggestion. Whatever the cause, Columbus may be pardoned for this necessarily expeditious explanations, or for his necessarily expeditious explanations for these encounters, knowing how a crew can panic when faced with the unexplained. Whether Columbus believed his story or not, or whether he was simply trying to keep his crew calm and protect his venture and life, is another conjecture altogether. It was easier to say Polaris moved than to admit their equipment was ceasing to work. That, in essence, the rules that had always governed navigation and seamanship had ceased to operate in a normal, predictable way. A similar motive may be responsible, though innocently, for our own tidy explanations for the unexplained events so often reported in the Bermuda Triangle. It is perhaps easier to blame our equipment or ourselves when we find ourselves on unfamiliar ground than it is to admit that there may be something beyond our own present knowledge or control. It is for those who believe these accounts are not so easily dismissed to draw parallels between them and the many cases of planes and ships that simply vanished in fair weather, some in unusual circumstances, some indeed in unbelievable circumstances. Even the Coast Guard allows an open forum by noting in their Chit's bibliography the work of other writers, including Vincent Gaddis. The simplest solutions, however, continue to be promoted by both the Coast Guard and Lloyd's of London, agencies that are naturally not eager to promote mysteries and that endorse enthusiastically any theory that seems the most conventional and readily understandable. But an open forum sweeps into the door some refreshing debate, some of which is allowed in official investigation. The evidence that, quote, believers, end quote, in the Triangle present for their theories, So the evidence they present for their theories is often very impressive. Many times more impressive, and sometimes embarrassingly more impressive than dry facts accumulated by the limitations of official inquiry. The disappearance of planes while coming in for a landing, radio calls from planes long vanished and long out of fuel, reports of weird objects harassing planes, plus the pattern of electromagnetic disturbances reported by many who survived unusual events, form a springboard into a pool of fascinating and disturbing conjectures. Scientists and researchers into geophysical data and those involved in the search for new forms of energy, plus many pertinacious observers in situ in the Bermuda Triangle, have compiled data individually that, when placed together in a broader perspective, may provide a startling solution to some of the mystery. To understand how an object can disappear, we must look at the very foundation of operating systems, at forces that are themselves invisible. And with that is the end of chapter 5. And look what we have for next week. I'm so looking forward to this chapter. So these discs are going up like this and making these like donut clouds. It's like it's pulling up clouds, and then those clouds are then turning into like a donut form. And then the planes and the ships that are going through them are being displaced in space and getting to locations much faster than they should be. About 10 times faster, it sounds like. This does sound like the work of some intelligent design. But what exactly is hard to say. So next week's chapter, we might split that into 2 shows. Because we'll be talking about space-time vortices, zero-point energy, and Atlantis. Hey, Rain, good to see you here. So yeah, that was about 20 pages. We went 2 hours and 10 minutes. The next chapter is 30 pages. So I think it will be wise for us to split chapter 6 into 2 parts. That way we have time to not only cover the chapter, but afterwards there's a whole bunch of photographs that match up with what we'll be reading about. 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a bunch of pages here of photographs. So that's that. And we are now that far in the book. This will give you a little better idea. Okay. Man, that's fascinating. You know, while reading all of this, visualizing something like a fog being lifted up by discs and then turning into donut-shaped masses of clouds and fog. Never crossed my mind until tonight. That they're being made on the surface and coming up like that. Almost like, let's say like a reverse nuclear detonation. It kind of sounds like a mushroom cloud on the water, doesn't it? At least that's what I got from it. And then, of course, we have these lights that are moving into the fog and then disappearing with the fog, and that's happening at night. Oh, nice, Rain. What island are you going to be on? Going near Bermuda? So that's the highest activity area there. Alright, I'll be calling this in about 2 minutes. I thank all of you for being here. As always, it's much appreciated. And be sure to leave a like. Share this around to people you know. You know, I'm really starting to wonder if there's language detection algorithms in YouTube, where if we start talking about certain topics that it suppresses the view counts. No big deal. I'll break through the threshold eventually. Right? But in the meantime, please show your support. Like, comment, and share. Share me your thoughts. What are you getting out of all of this? It's really fascinating here to me to go over all this material. And I can't wait to see even more accounts of anomalies. We're getting pieces of the puzzle together here. Yeah, thank you for being here, Rain. Andreas, Zenray, Texas Learny. Saw Ivy was in here earlier. Jason H. You guys are all awesome. And everyone else silently watching as well. It's okay. It's okay. As long as you're here. That's all that matters. But until the next one. Class dismissed.